So as we talked about the last Sunday of the month during the summer, we would do a Bible study type format rather than a sermon during the sermon slot for the second service. Is that confusing enough? So that's what we're doing today. And if I go overboard like I did last time too long, just start throwing stuff at me over here. I want to start out by sharing with a card that Annie put in my bag for this morning, and I saw it before church. The cover says, "Never give up on your dreams." And on the inside it says, "Except the one about superpowers. That one's not happening." I love that. I'll throw it away. It's good. Are you here, Annie, by any chance? Okay. So I want to start out just mentioning a couple of just some things about the first two readings, then I want to get into the Luke reading, and I'll try to be brief. But we're talking about superpowers, right? And so forth. And just want you to notice in the Elijah reading, here you have a mentor and the mentee, Elijah and Elisha. And Elijah is, he's older, he's going to leave this earth, right? He's going to be taken up. And he does so with a chariot of fire and horses of fire. Pretty interesting scene. Going up in a whirlwind. And that's how he leaves the planet. Okay? And this is going to come back to us in the Luke reading in a moment. But remember that. But doesn't that sound sort of like a superhero would do? They leave the planet that way. And then he leaves behind what for his protege, Elisha? What does he leave behind? A mantle. A mantle is just a garment. And so it's like I'm wearing a mantle now, sort of like a stole or whatever. And that's what gave Elijah his superpowers, his miracle powers. And so when Elijah goes up in the clouds, Elisha sees the mantle laying there, and he had already asked for a double portion of the Spirit, which means I want as much power or more that you have. And so he takes the mantle and thinks, I'm going to test it out now. And I'm going to see if it'll do what it did for Elijah, which is he splashes it into the Jordan River and the water parts. And it does that for Elisha. And so then Elisha knows, I've got superpowers too. I just want you to see the superpower theme that comes through these ancient writings. And then in the Galatians reading, I see this, what Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. I see this as sort of a list of real, authentic superpowers. None of this magic, miraculous stuff. These are real things. There's love. So think of these as a superpower that you and I have if we choose to exercise them. Love, joy. Because think of their power. Think of the power of these things that would affect lives if we actually went around and did these things. Peace, patience, kindness, generosity. And by the way, some of these are themes that I'm going to touch on or have touched on this summer. Faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You ever think of self-control as a power? It's like the anti-power, right? It's like curtail your power, so to speak. And by the way, there's no law against these things. I love that when Paul says that. There's no law against such things. Of course not. If you practice these things, the law doesn't come into effect, right? Okay, so now let's get to the gospel lesson. And you can follow along on the back of your bulletin, or if you want to take a Bible out or whatever. And I'm just going to go through and mention a few things. And then we'll have a short conversation. It begins by saying, when the days drew near for him to be taken up. Where did we just hear that? Taken up. What story was that? Elijah was taken up. One of the things the gospel writers try to do, and they're kind of sneaky about it, I have to admit. They don't spell it out. But in many places in the Gospels, they are linking Jesus with someone from the past. Usually Moses. Moses gets attached and linked to Jesus quite a bit. But here, Jesus is being linked to Elijah. Because we know, if we read the gospel stories later on, we read the story of Jesus ascending up to God, right? Their worldview was that God was up there in the sky. And so that was a way to connect Jesus with Elijah. Now, why would the gospel writers want to link Jesus with Elijah and then Moses? But why Elijah? Who does Elijah represent in the history of Israel? The prophets. He was the first and great prophet, the first great prophet in ancient Israel, about 8th century BC, going way back. And so basically the gospel writers, Luke at this moment, and we're going to see again in the same reading, another link to Elijah, I'll get to in a moment. But that Luke is trying to say Jesus is like Elijah. He's part of the prophetic tradition of ancient Israel. Now the reason that he's often linked with Moses is because Moses represented the law of Israel, right? The great law. And so Jesus, they're trying to link him, the gospel writers, to Israel's past, both the law and the prophets. Okay. So he's on his way to Jerusalem. Now we know what happens in Jerusalem. He has set his face toward Jerusalem means that he's looking that direction. He's heading that direction. And he sends messengers ahead of him. That is an advance team. An advance team. Who do we know that does that sort of thing? Who would send an advance team to a town in which a person is going to that town? A politician, a rock star, whatever. Well, there's going to be a big event, right? Usually you have an advance team and you go and you set things up. This is not quite on that level, but it's similar. We know from the Palm Sunday reading that Jesus often did that. He would send people to the nearest town or village that he was about to go to or go through and say, hey, Jesus, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's about to come through, so get ready. And that's why you have that ticker tape parade in the Palm Sunday story, because they were told by the advance team that he was coming. And it was also a way to pick up a mule along the way, so he could ride that donkey into Jerusalem. So he sends these messengers ahead of them. And they're going, it says, on their way they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. Now, so here's their route. They're going from Galilee, which is in the north. They're going to Jerusalem, which is in the south. To get there, the quickest way to get there is through Samaria. What do we know about the relationship between the Samaritans and the Galileans in the north and the Judeans in the south? They didn't like each other. They despised one another. And there are a lot of reasons why historically, and I'm not going to go into that. So basically, the advance team is having to go into this first village in Samaria and say, Jesus, he's a Galilean. You may have heard of him. He's kind of famous. He's coming through your territory. But they did not receive him, says Luke, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. In other words, they're mad because, number one, he's not coming through there to stop there and give a campaign speech or whatever he might do a miracle working service. He's on his way through going to Jerusalem, which in effect, to the Samaritan, is the capital of the enemy. So it's like, do we really want this guy to come through our territory when he's on his way to the capital of the enemy? No. And so they say, no, he can't do it. We're not going to receive him. Now the disciples, James and John, they're probably part of the advance team. They saw what's happening. And so they say, and here's where the Elijah story comes back in again. Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Does anybody know what story that might be linking Jesus to in the Old Testament? Specifically the book of 1 Kings. Anybody have a clue? Does it sound vaguely familiar about fire coming down from heaven and consuming what? The bull. It was the bull. So what happened? Elijah, he was despised by Ahab and Jezebel. Remember those characters? They didn't like Elijah. And so Elijah is kind of, his life is at stake. So he's like, I'm going to prove to Ahab and Jezebel that their prophets, the people that they are relying on as their prophets, namely prophets of Baal, the Canaanite god, I'm going to prove to the king and queen that they're wrong and I'm right. So he challenged them. He said, we're going to have this bull here, and I challenge you to call upon your God. He's telling all these, I think it's like 850 prophets or something, crazy amount of prophets. I challenge all of you to get down on your knees and you reach out to Baal and have Baal bring fire down on this bull. We'll have a good old sacrifice, and if that fire happens, then we'll just all worship Baal. And so they try. Even though that's never happened for them, they try. And guess what? No fire comes down from heaven. So then Elijah says, well, okay, I'm just one guy, you're 850, but I'm going to reach out to Yahweh, and I'm going to ask for Yahweh to send fire down from heaven. And guess what? Yahweh does that. And the fire comes down and consumes the bull. And then it's Katie bar the door for all the prophets of Baal. They're in trouble after that. Well, the disciples know that story. James and John know that story about Elijah. And again, they're trying to prove that Jesus is like another Elijah. Elijah never died, by the way. And so it's like maybe he's a reincarnation of Elijah. You remember when Jesus asked, who do men say that I am? Who do people say that I am? And one of the disciples said, some say you're Elijah. That's what's happening here. A lot of people thought, apparently, that he might be Elijah that's come back because Elijah never died. Guess who else never dies according to the Gospels? Jesus, right? So there you go. Or he dies, he comes back. So the disciples know this, their history. They know. They're trying to link him with Elijah. So he says, should we pour down, fire from heaven? And Jesus, he turned and rebukes them. Basically says, no, we're not going to burn down this village. That's not how I'm going to use my superpowers. So they go to another village. Excuse me. And as they were along the road, this is the interesting part of the story because you're going to see three people approach Jesus. And they all have the intent, perhaps, to follow him. Now, these are likely Samaritans because they're still going through that territory. But they've heard about Jesus, they know about him, and they're thinking, this is a guy I can get behind. I might follow him. So it says they were going along the road. Someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. But Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In other words, if you follow me, you're going to be sleeping, out in the wilderness. Probably you're using a rock for a pillow. You're going to have to give up your home, the comforts of your home. And although the text doesn't tell us, we can imagine that the guy said, no, not going to do that. I just thought maybe I'd follow you for a day, then come back home perhaps. Not going to do that. So then he turns to another, because apparently somebody's there listening. And the other person, he may have wanted to say, I'll follow you too, but he doesn't say anything. So Jesus sort of beats him to the punch. I can just imagine him turning to this guy over here and says, well, you follow me. And the guy, have you ever been in a situation where you hear a conversation going on and you know that the questions, whoever is asking the question is about to ask you the same question to do something? Because they just asked your friend and your friend is like, no, I can't do that. So you're sitting there going, oh, he's going to ask me to do that, so I better come up with an excuse. So the guy has a ready-made excuse when Jesus says, follow me. He says, Lord, first, let me go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Well, Jesus is basically saying to him, or the guy understands that, he would have to give up his family obligations. Now, it's unlikely that the man's father had actually died, right? But his father might be elderly, and so he's taking care of his father. And basically he's saying, I got to go home and take care of my dad and, probably other family obligations before I can follow you. And Jesus says, no, that's not a good enough excuse. And I'm going to ask you in a minute, are these good enough excuses? So the first guy, again, the first person, we don't know if it's a man or woman, didn't want to give up the comfort of home. The second one doesn't want to give up family obligations. The third person saying, you know what? I'm going to just beat Jesus to the punch. I'm not going to wait for him to ask me. So I'm just going to say, I will follow you, Lord, but anytime there's a but, there's caveat. But first let me say farewell to those at my home. Now this guy may have been a farmer, because Jesus' response to him is, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. So I suspect this guy may have come from the field. But so what he is thinking that he would have to give up, not only home and family obligations, but his livelihood. His livelihood. So he comes up with a ready-made excuse. Like, hey, let me go home and say goodbye to my family. I can pack my suitcase and say bye-bye, and that'll be it. But he doesn't. Now, what I want to say from all this, I don't think if Jesus were standing in front of us today, because the setting's different, the world is different, you have to admit, a lot of people Jesus talked to back then were peasants. They probably didn't have a place to live, didn't have much food. Their families probably decimated, but who knows? But it was easier to get a few people to come along with you. But today, I would assume probably not one person in here would be, if Jesus came and said, I want you to follow me, but you're going to have to give up your house, the comfort of your own bed. You're going to have to give up your families, and you're going to have to give up your livelihood, your job, your paycheck. How many of you would just pop right up and follow him out the door? Probably no one. Okay, so the question I have for you, though, then, is let's just be real, be contemporary. What might we have to give up if we want to, as I say, follow Jesus to the fullest extent? Because that's what he's asking these people, basically, to give up something that hurts the most. What would it be? And we could kind of update this a little bit. Let's see. I don't know why I'm doing that. It's because I did that. So I got powers, right? Yeah, some kind of electrical power. What might we have to give up? Things for our house. Maybe not our house, but things for our house. In terms of the family, might we have to do something that would irritate them a little bit and maybe create a little bit of a disagreement with our families? I'm talking about following Jesus. What would that imply?
You give up your security.
Your security, a little bit of your security? Which comes in what way? Financial? Because the last one's about a job, right? Saying, leave the field, come with me. Yeah. But again, I don't think any of us are going to do that. I really don't. Yes, Larry?
I think you have to give up your life as you know it and go to something that you know nothing about.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. So give up your life as you know it and do something. Not necessarily give something up, but do something with what you have, right? So we often talk about time, talent, treasure in a stewardship setting. That these three areas are affected by Christian discipleship, right? There might be times you have to give up your time, your talents, things that you can do. Your treasure would be your financial resources. In this book I'm reading about superpowers and faith and all that, the writer, he includes influence, that we might also have to use our influence. That's a resource that we have for the realm of God and so forth. Does anybody else have anything? Yes, Nancy.
We might start by getting to know our neighbors. I must confess that when we first moved to Ferguson, we had a young family and there were other young families.
Yeah.
But now that my children are not playing with all the other kids in the neighborhood, I don't know my neighbors very much. I mean, that could be it.
So I think we want to use the word comfort zone. And so what takes us out of our comfort zone? Because Jesus, when you think about it, he's asking these three people, and they all said no. But he's asking them in their setting, in their situation, to get out of their comfort zone, the comfort of home, the comfort of family, the comfort of an income and a job. So meeting your neighbors might be getting out of your comfort zone, taking the time and effort to do that. Doing something new, some kind of mission work, creating some kind of possibility to serve people could be. Yes, Sarah?
I wonder if taking a look at your priorities.
Yeah.
And realigning the priorities that we have.
Sure. Yeah, which might make you uncomfortable doing that because we get set in our ways. Do you have something, John?
Expectations of other people.
Expectations of other people. You might have to sacrifice that, to use that word, sacrifice, to give that up. Yeah. Yes?
If someone did that we know, took off, left their family, and did whatever, how do people look at them?
We would think, yeah. Unless you're as I mentioned earlier this morning, being called to be a missionary in a third world country. That would be something, right? But most of us are not, and not going to do that, or can't, or whatever. So yeah, what are we?
I remember the man who wrote John Livingston Seagull left his, I don't know how many children and wife, took off so he could find himself without his book.
Right.
I think that's kind of...
Right. I think we could imagine a lot of ways that we could get out of our comfort zones to enhance our ministry, to be more of a follower of Christ. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that today, because this is an uncomfortable topic. I'll bring it up. Today is ONA Sunday and the UCC Open and Affirming Sunday. It's the Sunday they designate. It also happens to be Pride Month, and we have the parade and all that going on today. And just to kind of give you an update, we put together a little committee and we looked at this months ago, and now we're just trying to work out a schedule where we can have these speakers to come in and to talk to us about the possibility of doing that. And I can tell you right now, just from talking to a few of you, there's going to be a level of uncomfortability. Is that a word? I don't even know. How about uncomfortableness? Who's the English teacher here? What's that? Discomfort? That's better, thank you. I grew up in West Texas. I don't have the superpower of English. But thank you for that. Yeah, but I mean, that could be, that's an example of a church, and many churches go through that. It can be a very uncomfortable process and whatever. And I just want you to know, if and when we go through that process and we have these meetings, I will understand, everybody will understand, talking about things like that can make people uncomfortable. The same would be about race. We've had a lot of conversations about race in Ferguson in the last few years especially, and that does make people uncomfortable. It's like you get very self-conscious about the language you use, right, when you talk about such things. So I know those are the kinds of things that could arise. Anything else that you could even imagine? Because I know we're kind of gone over time here. And by the way, I did. I asked Dakota if he would be Robin if I'm Batman. I mean, isn't he a perfect Robin? He's not here today. But I'm going to tell him I said this. He's not real tall, so. But he's a squeaky clean looking guy. It's like Robin, Anyway. Okay, anything else you want to say or add or whatever? And I do like this card, by the way. I didn't throw it. I wasn't being mean. It's a good card. Never give up on your dreams, except the one about superpowers. That one's not happening. I know. That's good.